minutes, because I think it is now time for us to hear the chat I had with the individual that most people think will be our next Prime Minister, this time next week in 10 Downing Street. That's Boris Johnson. I caught up with him just before the last leadership hustings, and I asked him how and whether, life would feel different for us on the 1st of November if he delivers on his most important promise, which is to get us out of the EU by the end of October.
I suppose it depends on exactly what kind of deal we strike. But what we will, I think, do is have a standstill, a zero tariff, zero quota arrangement, whereby we smooth things over for business, where we make sure that they don't have any unnecessary bumps or shocks, and then we get on with negotiating a free trade agreement. And in the context of that free trade agreement, we solve all the issues of how to have frictionless trade at the Irish border and everywhere else. And so in that, from the 1st of November onwards, though, the work can begin on launching a global Britain, a country that is able not only to do free trade deals, but also to start thinking about ways in which we can really boost the UK economy. Think of the ways in which we could start diverging, if necessary, from the EU rules on whatever it happens to be on bioscience or financial services or areas in which we happen to be very strong. We'll be able to start thinking a bit differently. So it's a big opportunity for this country. And I think it's about time we started thinking about that opportunity and started being a bit more positive.
I'm sure you're right about that it is time that we look beyond Brexit. But people, I think, would still quite like to have a sense of what day one means. I mean, would your hope be that for a period we would still be in the customs union, for example, so that there would be so-called frictionless trade with the rest of the EU until your new free trade deal is being negotiated?
That obviously follows from what I've said about a standstill with a zero tariff, zero quota arrangement. But clearly what will happen at some point in the next couple of years is that we will have to come out of those arrangements finally. What happens is, on October the 31st, we leave the EU's legal order.
Yeah.
What you might do is protract the current zero tariff, zero quota arrangement so as to smooth things over for business. But the reason it's so important to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, where you come out whole and entire on October the 31st, is because whatever happens in the next few years, we're going to have to make that kind of preparation to come out anyway. We're going to need to make that kind of adjustment, whether it's in terms of the facilitations for the Irish border or wherever. So there's a big logic.
But in your ideal world,
in really getting ready.
But in your ideal world of what you call a standstill and the current Prime Minister calls a transition,
an implementation period,
or an implementation period, excuse me. She had, a maximum of 21 months for that. What would your maximum be?
I wouldn't want to go any longer than necessary, and I certainly
is that 21 months?
Crazy.
I mean, it's 21 months.
We've got to come out well before the next election. Put it that way.
So it's got to be well before the. So, but it could run up to 2022.
I wouldn't want it to go as long as that. We've got to, we should come out. I see no reason to come out. Delay until the next election. We should come out well before the next election.
End of 2020, is that a deadline?
I'm not going to. Well, I think the deadline initially was the end of 2020. It was 2020. It was then extended, as you remember, to the end of 2021.
Would for you end of 2020 be a deadline?
I don't want to put a deadline except to say I want it to come out well before the next election. And the crucial thing is to come out on October the 31st, make sure that we leave the EU's legal order, and then any negotiation we do about the free trade agreement, as I say, should not take any longer than a year or so, a couple of years, and then come out well before the next election.
Now, you said you don't want a no-deal Brexit. What evidence do you have, however, that keeping that either threat or risk, depending on how you want to characterise it, on the table actually helps you negotiate? Why
Because
is it helpful?
Because we've got to do it anyway. We're coming out on October the 31st, and that's a hard deadline that I think our EU friends and partners understand, and we're reconciled to it. And as I say, if they won't give us a standstill, if they decide that they won't give us any kind of implementation or transition, okay, fine. We'll have to live with it. And this is an amazing country. And a lot of the
so you did say that if we prepare properly, but I want to get this on this preparation.
But you understand,
Sure.
I think the key thing that maybe people haven't understood is that a lot of the preparations that we've already made up to March the 29th and the further preparations that we're going to make, and so we get really, really ready by October the 31st, they will be invaluable anyway. So even if we get a further implementation period to negotiate the FTA, you're going to need to have done such preparation. So this is the best possible position for the country to be in.
But when you said you made this statement that the costs of no deal would be vanishingly small if we prepared properly. What does preparing properly mean?
Well, it means there's lots of good question. There's lots of different things you've got to get right. And as you know, there are lots of side deals that we've already done, whether it's on aviation or on financial services. A lot of work is already in place. The couple of areas I would single out that have needed special attention are the chains of administrative command in Northern Ireland. That's really got to be properly fixed. Ideally, you want Stormont up and running.
But
again,
it probably won't be.
It's not the end of the world if it isn't, but I would like it to be. Everybody wants it to be, and it should be. And then, secondly, there is still an issue with the 147,000 SMEs, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, that export to nowhere else except the European Union. Only about a third of them have got hold of the right customs forms. Now, that is because there hasn't been an adequate campaign.
So will there be?
to get people ready.
So from the moment if you become Prime Minister, taking nothing for granted, will you do a public information campaign more or less immediately?
Yes, Robert. And here's your scoop. And you will remember, because you're a brilliant journalist, you will remember the 1992 campaign, Get Ready for the Single Market. And you remember what we did then. You remember the billboards across the world, across London, everywhere, with the glowering visage of Sir John Harvey Jones saying, "Are you ready?" And I think.
So will it be your glowering visage?
No, but I think there will be. What we will do is we will encourage people in a very positive way.
From the moment you're there, the campaign will start.
From the get-go, we start saying, "Look, what do you need? What help do you need? What reassurances do you need? Right. Agricultural community, farmers in Wales,
small businesses,
fishermen, everybody. Just-in-time supply chains. Yeah. Here is what the government has for you. Are you ready?" And we make sure everybody understands all the possible risks and eventualities. And it's by doing that, to get to the point that you made correctly just now, it's by doing that in a really wholehearted and systematic and confident way that you, of course, minimise any disruption that might take place in the unlikely eventuality of you actually having to come out on WTO terms.
And your view is that because the EU is such an important market, that a trade deal with the EU is the most important trade deal that we've got to negotiate, even more important than the trade deal with the US.
Well, that's a very good point.
So the question which follows from that is, why are we leaving the EU?
Well, because you can do a great trade deal with the EU, but you can also do a great trade deal with the US and others. Now, the funny thing is the EU 10 years ago represented substantially over half our export market. It's now substantially under half, and it's
still our most important market.
It is, but the United States is by far our single most important national destination for British exports.
But it's still half the size of the European market.
But look at the growth just in the US alone. Look at the growth in the Commonwealth countries. Look at the growth in export markets around the world.
But you've got to get the trade deal with the EU right.
Of course you have, but don't forget that they have a 65 billion pound surplus with us in goods alone, they have a massive incentive to get a great free trade deal done with the UK, and that's what we're going to do.
Now, we don't want to stay on. I've got one final sort of Brexit question, but I would like to move on to other things. And it is this. Obviously, the most difficult issue for this Prime Minister has been this issue of how you keep the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland open. In the event that we have a no-deal Brexit, which you say you don't want, but in the event we have that, how will you keep that border open on November the 1st? Not when the kit's in place and you've got your, wonderful new technological solutions, but on November the 1st, how will you keep it open?
But because we in the UK government, under no circumstances, will be imposing physical checks of any kind involved at the Northern Irish border, and nor, by the way,
doesn't it worry you that, for example, diseased meat and diseased stuff could be coming from the EU on that basis?
No, because obviously we remain now in a state of perfect regulatory harmony and on sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, as you know.
Yeah, but you're basically
we're
saying anything can come from the EU to us, then, while they may well impose checks the other direction.
Well, they've said that they won't, and they've said that there is no need. And furthermore, you don't need to impose. If you suppose you were worried about a consignment of dodgy beef or whatever that had come in, let's say from the United States or somewhere. Don't do down the United States beef exporters, but so there's beef. There was a consignment of beef that didn't in some way conform with EU standards that had come into Belfast. All right, and I don't know. Think of another country, and the issue was what was going to happen to that beef when it was sold on across the Northern Irish border. There are plenty of ways already. To verify rules of origin, to check for sanitary and phytosanitary qualifications away from the border. And that is where you do it.
But just to be clear, and you're aware of this, if you don't put in place, as you know, these away from the border technological solutions, you know that you'll have to allow goods in from the rest of the world without checks and without tariffs, that you can't do any trade deals until you solve the Northern Ireland border problem.
Well, I don't think that's true at all.
I think it is true.
No, what we could get with the EU, and everybody's been around this many times, is an agreement not only not to put in border checks, and we won't put in border checks. Sure. If they decide to, that's a matter for them. But I don't think they will. I said we'll maintain an open border. Businesses north and south will continue to have full confidence, and as everybody knows, it is open to both sides in the debate, in the deal, to have a GATT 24 agreement.
Now I've got three quick questions on other things. Okay, one is I ran into a lovely young individual, 15-year-old boy from your old school, Eton, and I said, "What do you and your chums think about Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister?" And he said gleefully, "Number 20." Which, as you may or may not know, refers to the fact that you would be the 20th Etonian or old Etonian to be Prime Minister. Now, does that show that this is a country that is fully functioning when it comes to social mobility, or does it show that things don't work out terribly fairly here?
I think our audience knows is one Balliol man putting that question to another Balliol man.
Comprehensive, educated Balliol man. But you're right. There is an issue about Balliol too. I agree about that.
But the serious answer to your
it's an important question.
It's an important question. But
about opportunity.
But what I want to do is, and I don't think it actually matters where you come from, that's what your programme is for the country. And what I want to do is to level up opportunity around the country. And there is, if you look at this city, I can tell you that when I became mayor of this city, we had this area was amongst the poorest in the whole of the UK. The East End of London, we massively lifted. By fighting crime, we reduced the murder rate by about 50%, by putting in fantastic transport infrastructure, and by all sorts of means of closing the opportunity gap. When I ceased to be mayor, it was the poorest people in London who'd seen the biggest increases in their life expectancy, but also their opportunities. So what I would want to do, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, is lift up the whole country in the way that London was lifted up. Or those who felt they had no opportunities in London have been able
You'll forgive me,
to
you
take
did
part.
slightly avoid the question whether it's good or bad that an institution like Eton or like Balliol so dominates appointments to top jobs. Does that not worry you?
What I want is to see better funding of education around the country. And what I've pledged to do on day one is to put in £4.6 billion of spending on levelling up education funding in every school in the country. Because what I believe, and I think what everybody in the Conservative Party wants to see, is all kids in our country having access to a great education, which is the same fundamental tool that I had. Yes, I did. I'm very proud of it. I had a fantastic education. But I want all kids to have a fantastic education. And that's why the first thing we're doing is spending more on lifting per capita funding for education.
And finally, Theresa May actually has only 5 women who are full members of a cabinet of 23. Will you do better than that?
You're brilliant, Robert, in trying to get me to make commitments about
but
the cabinet.
You'll be aware that there are some
to...
women who think that you somehow are uncomfortable with working with women.
No, but that's very unfair if you consider the way I ran City Hall.
Who's the most influential woman on your campaign now?
Well, we have a lot of very, very influential
women.
Come
on, name one, then.
Well,
Come on.
Liz Truss, Priti Patel,
So what jobs are they going to get?
That's a ridiculous. That is the kind of trivialising
I'm not
question. I'm not going to answer.
You did say earlier this week that one of the big offices of state would go to a woman. Are you sticking with that commitment?
If I have already made that commitment, I'm certainly not going to resolve from it now. But what I don't want to make any further commitments. But what I just remind you, when I ran City Hall, about half the top team were women. We launched the first ever strategy in this country against violence against women and girls. We did a massive amount and I will, as Prime Minister, I will continue to do absolutely everything to promote women in politics. And
you just broke your golden rule. You said, as Prime Minister, and at that point,
I will.
I think we have to end this.
Let me insert a subjunctive.
I think we noticed there was a... Anyway, look, very nice to see you, and
nice to see you, Robert.
Enjoy the rest of the campaign.
Thank you.